Hi everybody, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that video on wealth inequality in America today. It's really enlightening. I didn't realize what that looked like until I watched that video for the first time, and now I show it to every single class I teach, no matter what the topic is. And we're going to be talking a lot about the different percentages that were addressed in the movie because it is social stratification is basically what that video is talking about. And it's talking about social class. So, and by the way, I'm hoping that every one of you that lives in Northern California is staying nice and dry and warm tonight. I don't know about you all. I live in Concord, and it's really raining here. So I hope you all are doing okay. So when we talk about stratification, a lot of professors, a lot of textbooks like to use the ship metaphor. Now, everybody's pretty familiar with the story of the Titanic, where you have a poor artist who falls in love with a rich British heiress and, dies right at the end of it. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to blow the movie for anybody, but that's what happens. But if we looked at this movie from a sociological perspective, we could really see social stratification in action. Now, I'm a sailor. I love boats. I would live on a boat if I could. So I wanted to throw this up and kind of explain to you very briefly how this works. If you look right here, this is the water line. All of this stuff is underneath the water. Now, if you've ever been on a boat, you know that part of the boat is the wettest, right? It's smelly. It's not fun to be down there. And it is hard to get back up to the deck, to the top side of the deck, if you're down here, socially speaking. All right, you've got no windows, you've got very limited resources, not a pleasant experience. Now, if you look above the water line and below the deck, that would be right here, you probably have portholes there. You're able to see land, you're able to see the sun. Rations are probably better. The accommodations are definitely a lot nicer than they are below you. And you're only one level away from being on deck, up top side, right? Up here. That's where the upper class reside, right? They're in the fresh air. They've got the deck chairs. They're living the dream, right? Well, society works a lot like this ship metaphor. So now in the Titanic, the ship breaks apart and sinks, right? Who do you think got off the boat first? It was everybody on the deck, right? Everybody that had a social position, they had prestige. They were in that upper class. They were able to save themselves. Some of the middle class folks got out okay. They scrambled up to the deck. They made it in time. But the majority of the people that died on the Titanic, and this is actually, I'm not just taking this from the movie, this is real, were below that water line. They were in the bowels of the boat because they weren't able to climb that ladder fast enough. And eventually they ran out of important resources like dry boat, air, and security. So the Titanic is a really interesting movie when you look at it sociologically, and I think the next couple slides are going to reinforce this metaphor for you. So when we talk about social inequality, we're talking about the differences that people have in income, wealth, power, which is the ability to exert your will on others, and prestige. How prestigious a position do you have in society? We rate those out, right? And we say that a doctor has a much more prestigious position in society than, say, a stockbroker does, right? Because they are seen to do good. Doctors do good, stockbrokers just take your money, right? Social stratification, on the other hand, is what we just talked about, both, right? It's the systematic ranking of individuals or groups of individuals based on a hierarchy. And a hierarchy means that you have a top who gets everything and you've got a bottom who gets nothing, basically. That difference in getting everything and getting nothing is called inequality. So two terms your book uses is the nouveau rich and the nouveau poor, okay? And they add that little E on the to rich. It's supposed to be pronounced riche or something like that. I don't know. But those were the guys that were able to come up. In the Industrial Revolution, you had Andrew Carnegie, you had Rockefeller, the big names back east, these barons of industry who came from nothing and made a fortune. And their families today still share in that prestige and power because they were able to have enough to leave for their heirs, for generations to come. Now, what's interesting, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in just a few minutes, is that inheritance thing, the way inheritance works. People were excluded from that for a long time, and when we talk more about how that works, you'll see it. In the 20th century, you're looking at people like Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, those innovators, the people that saw what technology could do and jumped on it quickly and made a fortune that way. Neither one of them came from a lot of money, although I think Steve Jobs, I think he was from like Palo Alto to begin with, and he had a college education, so I mean, he was not, poor by any sense of the imagination, but he did exceed the level that his parents were at when he, made billions and billions of dollars with Apple computers and whatnot. Now, we also see this in the 21st century, like Mark Zuckerberg. He would be considered a Negro-rich type of individual, although he went to Harvard, I think it was, or Yale, one of those two. So he was still in this power, upper class, strata, but he's always seen as this great success story. Now, with the Great Recession of 2007, we saw something else emerge, another class of individuals, and we call them the New World Poor. Those were individuals that had high status. They were in the upper middle class, and all of a sudden they lost their homes, their jobs, their retirement, all of this stuff, when the economy collapsed. And instead of being middle class, they were relegated to a lower class position, maybe a working class position. Lots of stories out there of executives who couldn't find a job even at McDonald's, right? The homeless issue, we do surveys and censuses, and we find a lot of these individuals actually became homeless during this period of time because they lost all of their assets. So stratification, it can, the three examples I'm going to show you, two are in the caste system. And a caste system is when a social level is closed off completely to outsiders, meaning that you are ascribed that position by birth, it's your birthright, and you die in that social position. Your heirs maintain that social position that you had, and your the people that came before you held that same position. Moving up and down the social strata, impossible, or virtually impossible. Very rarely, if ever, happens. It's ascribed, like I said, you're born into this. You cannot achieve social mobility in a caste society. One of the most popular examples is India, and that's a religious caste, and is based on religious texts that date back thousands of years. And I'm going to show you that as an example. I'm also going to show you an example of a racial caste system in South Africa. But I wanted to bring up this point that caste system was alive and well in the United States during slavery. And then after slavery ended, the segregation era that followed. Segregation didn't just happen in the 50s. A lot of people say that segregation began in the Reconstruction era and continued on. So to say that the United States has never had a caste system is completely and utterly untrue, and you'll see why when we talk about South Africa. So here's the stratification system for India. At the very, very top, that 1%, you've got the gods, and then each level below the gods is measured in the closeness to the god. So at the very top, our, upper class, what we would consider to be upper class, would be the priests and the academics. They're closest to God. After that, you have the ruling class, the warriors, the kings. The middle class, very, very close to what our middle class would be, or the middle caste. The skilled trades, the merchants, people that own land. And below that, you have the working class. Those are the commoners, the peasants, the servants, the individuals who don't own land but rent it from the landholders. And what's interesting about the caste system in India is they have this class of the untouchables. Those are society's outcasts. They're the unskilled laborers. They're the people that are a part of the subversive part of society as seen within this system. I was watching a National Geographic show one night, and they talked about one of the sects, S-E-C-T-S, of untouchables, and they were snake charmers, and they were not allowed to settle on any piece of land. So they lived going up and down the Ganges River. They were a group of untouchables, yet they still held some, they served a purpose in society. However, they were not allowed to become mainstream in that society. And I thought about that. I thought that was so interesting. When we look at South African apartheid, we're looking at a racial class, caste system, where you've got whites at the top. They are the minority, but they are definitely in power. They were European, mainly British. And at the bottom, you have a large majority of Native African or blacks. They may have the majority in numbers, but they are in the minority when it comes to power, because whites are in control. Whites are making the rules. What is interesting is in this system you have a third caste, which is those of mixed race or Indo-Asians. A lot of people from India in that area came to South Africa, especially in the 50s and the 60s. So they were seen as not black, but not quite white. They were the other of that society. So they shared some of the power, probably not power, but some of the prestige that whites held, but they were relegated to a position of low whites when it came to power relationships and whatnot. When we talk about stratification in a class society, which is what we in the United States see, we have a totally different system in that the place in society is not necessarily ascribed. It can be achieved. Meaning, if I start out as a working class individual, I'm born into a working class family. If I work hard, I go to school, I get a good paying job, I can move through the ranks and I can become part of the, upper middle class. Probably not the upper class, and definitely not the 1%. If you want to go that route, by the way, if you want to become part of the 1%, and God love you if you do, don't become a sociology professor. Not going to happen, okay? But the chance of me being able to do that is theoretically there. All right? When we talk about race, when we talk about gender, you're going to see that that's really not the case. But theoretically, class position can change. You can move up and down the social ladder, okay? Your position is not necessarily ascribed. So if our positions in society in the U.S. were ascribed rather than achieved, we wouldn't see African Americans or people of color in positions of power in the United States. Now, that's not to say that the white power structure is still not in play. I'm not saying that at all. But we do see examples in society where people have been able to come up. A really good example of this is Oprah Winfrey. She may not have a lot of power in the United States, but man, look at all of the good things this woman has been able to do throughout the world. And she started out from a working class family. You know, her roots, her story of coming up is very well known. And she's one of these individuals that we would say achieved social class by transcending these levels. Okay? So this is what our model looks like, excuse me, in 2011 in the United States. So you can see the capitalist class. Those are like Sam Walton's kids, right? When it comes to heirs, you know, people that got money because their parents were wealthy, right? And they were able to transfer that wealth to generations after them. Investors, that's a huge class of individuals who really have been able to take hold of the marketplace and they own everything, right? Along with the executives in this country. The upper middle class, those are upper management professionals. They are mid-sized business owners. Many times these individuals have formal education. They've gone through the credentialing process, which you're going through right now, going to school, getting an MBA maybe, or making social connections. They're definitely not part of the 1%, but they're not doing too bad. You know, they're doing all right. The middle class, this is where, you know, a lot of individuals now fall. Those are the managers that are middle management. That might be semi-professional, you know, craftsmen like, you know, union workers, electricians, plumbers, those kind of individuals. People that don't do retail but do wholesale sales, they're in the middle class. Below that, you have low-skilled clerical and retail workers. Notice that they make up about 30% of the working class or the population in 2011. These are the people that we say have no skills. You know, anybody can go and work at Kmart. Well, I would argue that's not quite the case. And there's a skill that you have to be in retail. But it's not something that you necessarily go to school and get a degree for, right, to stand in a checkout line. The working poor are those individuals who are the lowest of the low, you know, the lowest paying individuals that we have, making minimum wage, farm workers in Central Valley, you know, people, domestic labor, people come in and clean houses for a living or take care of children, daycare, things like that, and retail workers. They're the working poor. Most of them make at or below minimum wage. The underclass, which is not something that the video really talked about a whole lot, but could be seen as part of the working poor. Those are the individuals that are unemployed, underemployed, on public assistance. Maybe they take a couple of menial jobs, you know, passing out flyers, or you know, it's not solid, steady work. You know, sign. Hey, you know what? Sign people. You know, the ones that dance around with signs. They would be considered to be part of the underclass probably, unless they're making really good money. But that's kind of messed up because some of those cats have skills. But this is the way social class stratification works in the United States. You can move up and down the ladder. You know, there for a while during the 70s, the 80s, you know, or I should say after World War II, lots of people went from the working poor to the middle class. Huge expansion of the middle class. The video talked about that. Then all of a sudden we see a shrinking of the middle class. You know, you've got less people going to the capitalist and upper middle class strata, and more individuals going into the working class. Okay, so there are three things that you have to remember when we talk about stratified systems. If we rank people by social categories, that's a stratified system. So whether it be race, religion, ethnicity, income, as it is in the United States, These are all social categories of people. We know in stratified systems that where you rate on the system, will influence your life experience and opportunities. Achieved status, while it is it's what we say we have in the United States, I really feel like we could also say that we have an ascribed system to some degree, in that if you are a woman or you are an individual of color, you are probably not going to make as much as a white male is going to make. Your life chances, your life experiences and opportunities are heavily influenced by your race and your gender. And we know that. The numbers bear that out every single time. So to say that the United States class system is based on achieved status, I think, 100% based on achieved status, I think is a little unfair. And we need to recognize that other factors, as well as these two, can really impact one's life chances. The third thing is that it's a very hierarchical system. When we talk about stratified systems, there's definitely, the power up top and less power down below. But these positions can and do change slowly over time. They don't change overnight, obviously, and it may take 200-300 years for systems to change, but we do know that eventually they change. Hopefully towards a more equitable relationship between the social categories, but oftentimes that doesn't happen. And Marx will talk more about that when we get into Marx. So, the modern capitalist, your book, I think, talks about this teardrop shape. I'm cool with that, whatever, okay? Class, that is your economic position, and it is based on income, wealth, and occupation. And we're going to talk about what income, wealth, and occupation are in just a second. Your life chances, those are the opportunities that you have based on what class you represent, what your social strata is, okay? Remember, we're only talking about economics right now. We're only talking about social class. Race is something different. Gender is something different. Those two things heavily impact social class in a lot of ways. But as sociologists, we try to parse them out so that we can then bring them back together and see how the three components work in collusion with each other. Your life chances are all the stuff that you go through during your life based on your social class. If you're a member of the working poor, you're not going to have access to health care like someone in the upper class would. You're not going to be able to go to the specialist. You're going to end up at county health. And if the county health system that you're a part of isn't very good, if you have a lot of turnover by doctors and whatnot, you have very, very few doctors in the system, say, that have a lot of experience, that's going to impact you because your health isn't going to be as good. The food that you eat is directly related to the neighborhood that you live in. There's these things called food deserts. I just found this out recently. There's actually a name for it. We've been talking about it for years in sociology. And it is where you will go into a neighborhood and the nearest Safeway is 2 bus lines away and takes a half an hour to get to. You can't just walk down the street and get fresh produce, fresh meat, fresh cheeses. All the good food that you need to eat is way more expensive in a mom and pop than it is at a big chain retailer, right? And forget about Whole Foods, okay? That's non-existent. So you have small mom and pop community grocery stores trying to serve the needs of the community, but their overhead is higher. The food costs, healthy food costs more, and so there's this real push to bring in farmers markets and things like that into these food deserts. And when we get into race, we'll probably talk about this a little bit more. And then finally, social mobility, that upward downward movement of status and for individuals and groups over time. Income. Okay, income is the amount of money you make, okay, over, or your household makes over a given period of time, right? So it is all about the dollars. You know, what am I getting for the labor or the product I produce in society? It consists of your salary, your investments, your Social Security, and your disability. All of those things go into factor into your income. The way income is figured in the United States is they take all of the money that you get, and then they subtract out the costs of living, right? The cost of living increases and decreases. Well, that's the cost for your food, your clothing, your shelter, your health care, your transportation needs, all of those day-to-day stuff that you spend. So you take your income, you take your cost of living, and you subtract the cost of living out. That's going to help to determine the median U.S. household income. Okay, so that's like the net amount, right? That's how much it costs, or how much money you're making to put away for retirement or whatever it is. The median U.S. household income has decreased by at least 12% over the last 11 years. I know it's lower now than it was. Like I said before, I live in Concord, and the cost of living, or the poverty line for an adult in Contra Costa County is like $45,000 a year. Now, back home in Pennsylvania, you're making $45,000 a year. You're doing pretty darn good. You know what I'm saying? Because the cost of living isn't as expensive. So these numbers are an aggregate number of all U.S. households. California is one of them, in New York, a couple of the other high, income areas where you make more, but it costs more to live there. It's not, that's factored into this. But there's plenty of other places where the cost of living is crazy low compared to here. Wealth or net worth, that's all the stuff that you accumulate, right? There used to be a bumper sticker and it said the one who dies with the most boys win, or something like that. I was very, very much in favor of materialism. Buy everything you can. Get a hold of all the resources and all the goods that you can get. Well, there's a theory behind that, right? If you accumulate all this stuff, and I'm talking about homes, vehicles, stocks, bonds, cash, investment assets, all of that stuff, non-liquid assets. In other words, I can't take it into a store and buy something with it. I have to liquidate it first. All of that stuff is my net worth, my net wealth, right? When we say somebody is wealthy, they can make $25,000 a year. But if they have $2 billion in assets, right, that's the overall value of everything they own, they're wealthy, right? So income and wealth are not necessarily the same thing. You can have a very low income, but a high net worth, right? Paris Hilton, okay? Enough said about that. So wealth is built up, accumulated over a lifetime, and passed down to your heirs when you die. Now here is where the disparity occurs in our system, in my opinion. Systematically, individuals have been prohibited by law and by practice, everyday practice, from accumulating this wealth, from accumulating these goods and passing them down to the next generation. And this is systematic. This has happened throughout time in this country. So there's an inequity built in the system that if my people, my family, was never able to accumulate that wealth, I would be starting out with nothing. And my neighbor, if their family, were, of means, white, in power, had some control, owned their own house, they could pass that down to their kids. Well, their kids are going to be wealthy. My kids aren't going to be wealthy. You see how that works? And that wealth then influences your life outcomes, your life opportunities, because that's how your social class, you're born into the social class of your parents, and usually your grandparents, okay? When you have wealth, you have access to the best healthcare, you have access to a high quality education, you get business connections, there's a social network of affluence that you operate in. You know, you're part of that elite group, and you can create new wealth within that group. And this is one of the main arguments I think the video that we watched prior to this lecture is addressing, is that if you can't save money, if you can't buy stocks, if you can't buy bonds, if you can't afford to buy a house, your wealth, your net worth is nothing. You have nothing to give your children. And that's where the cycle of inequity is continuing on intergenerationally. I hope that made sense. Your occupation. This is how you get paid, okay? It's your main source of income. Good example. I'm a professor. That's my occupation. That's what I do, okay? I also race sailboats. That's not my occupation. I only do that part-time. I don't make a living doing that. You know, I get paid, but I don't make a living doing it. It's not my main source of income, okay? I can have other areas of income that I work at, but my main occupation is a faculty member, as a professor, part of academia, okay? There's collars. You probably have heard of this stuff before. Blue-collar workers, those are manual laborers. People who are coming to your door fixing your toilet at 2 o'clock in the morning if it overflows. You know, the mechanic down the street that fixes your car. White-collar workers, you know, they usually have a formal education. I would be considered a white-collar worker now because I'm not getting hands dirty. I'm not doing manual labor. Pink-collar workers. I'd never heard of this one until I started using this textbook. Those are the semi-skilled, low-paid service positions that women primarily occupy. So we're talking here, this is talking about the women who do domestic labor for money, meaning they go into other people's homes, take care of their children, make dinner, clean, do laundry, all of that stuff. That's pink-collar work. Okay, so you're getting your hands dirty. It's no different than a blue-collar worker, right? Except it's done in the house. It's done taking care of the domestic labor of the home. Gold-collar individuals. Mark Zuckerberg, right here, right? All the cats that go and work for these .coms making all this dang money, not sharing with us, right? The young professionals. Some of you will end up in this category, right? You got right out of college, you know, you get a high salary, you've got good benefits, you've got stock options, the place goes up, you're making millions and millions of dollars. Look at Silicon Valley, gold-collar workers right there, okay? Your status, that is where you occupy, what level you occupy within your social position, all right? So there's actually a sociologist. We've actually developed these scales. They're kind of cool. So what we do is we look at high prestige jobs and low prestige jobs. You know, doctors, they make a lot of money, most of them, right? Scientists, they're going to make nurses, firefighters, they make a lot. Teachers, no, they do not make a lot of money, right? Even at this level, I don't make a lot of money. I do this because I love doing it, right? I love the ability to talk with you all, because every class that I give, every lecture I give, and the discussion boards that you are writing and your journals, I'm learning from all of that just as much as you are. And so society says, or they used to say, wow, Susan, you do something good for society, right? They may not pay you like you're doing something good for society, but you still have some kind of prestige. My grandmother loves to go around and tell people that I teach for a college and a university. Oh, Susan, my granddaughter, she's a professor at a university. Now, my brother makes a lot more money than I do. My sisters make a lot more money than I do. My cousin makes a lot more money than I do. Yet, my position in her eyes has a lot of prestige, and it does with all of her friends as well. Low prestige jobs. Now, I want to strike out actors because I think that they have high prestige in our system. At least the ones that make a lot of money and that are doing a lot of good for society, like Oprah Winfrey and people like her. But think about stockbrokers and accountants and real estate agents. Aren't those the guys that got us into all of this mess that we're trying to claw our way out of? Yeah. So they may get high paid, but you know what? I wouldn't tell somebody I was a stockbroker or a real estate agent. You took advantage of people. How about bankers? There you go. There's another really low prestige job, right? So it doesn't matter how much money you're making. It matters how people view what you're doing in the world and what you're contributing to society. That is status. So we've talked about all this other stuff. Now let's start to get to that stuff that I was talking about before, the power, right? Marxist. We're getting into Marx territory now. Political power is that ability to influence your will on a political institution, right? To get what you want. So, we hear all the time about lobbyists, for the Sierra Club and for the NRA, and for all these different special interest groups, right? Well, they hold political power. They're very important because they're able to, make things happen. They can realize their political goals. So, a lot of people in the United States are saying, you know what? We need stiffer gun control laws. I think the last poll was like 75% of Americans are like, yeah, get rid of the guns, people. We need to do that. Well, you have this 25% that's represented by the NRA, and we haven't seen any movement on that, right? That's political power. There's a political end game to it, all right? It's not just about the majority. It's like, I can make you do what I want politically. Now, C. Wright Mills, remember him from back in chapter 1 and his power elite? Yeah. Okay, if you know what the Illuminati is, that's really kind of what C. Wright Mills was talking about. He didn't use those words, and, I hesitate to use them because, you think conspiracy theory and whatnot. But you've got this group of elite individuals, and C. Wright Mills would not have said that they were the Illuminati. But he would have said, you have this group of politically and socially connected elitists, right? The people that we have no access to. Sometimes we don't even know who they are, right? They share this common worldview or common background, right? Skull and bones, I'm just saying. And they have a consensus when it becomes a time to make a decision. There was a lot of resistance to going into Iraq, for the last desert storm that we went through, this last war that we're still kind of fighting. A lot of people didn't want to do that, right? But you had this group of politically elite individuals that came together and were able to make it happen in various ways. So that's C. Wright Mills' power elite. That's what he's talking about. And, they're from every single branch. There's a social network. I try really hard not to talk too much about this, you guys, because I am a total conspiracy theorist when it comes to this kind of stuff. So just know C. Wright Mills' power elite dialed in. Okay, so functionalist perspective on all of this. Davis and Moore. They say, you know what? If you didn't have status, if you didn't have social class, if you didn't have stratification, you wouldn't have positions being filled by competent people, right? You wouldn't have anybody want to do better than what they are, right? This is this whole idea of, give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day, teach him to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime, or however that goes, right? That meritocracy. You're going to be able to achieve anything that you think is possible and that you're willing to put the effort into. So if you're good at something and you work hard at it, you're going to come up, right? So that's the functionalist perspective. Functionalists would say class is important because it makes people want to work, right? They talked about it in the video as the dreaded 20% socialism, right? For functionalist perspective, say, yeah, we're trying to avoid that by having a class system. So, you know what? No, not happening. At least what the opponents of Davis and Moore state. They don't take into account that there are life outcomes limitations, right? If you don't get to go to the best school and make those social networks, you can't become connected. You may have the greatest idea in the world, but if nobody's going to listen to you, if you don't have the credibility, you're going to lack the networks to make something happen. People that are born into privileged positions have a wealth of opportunity in front of them. They have the connections. They're able to realize their occupational success because, there's probably a path for them, A good example is, a father who has a father who's a lawyer and he has a son, right? And the son decides, oh, I'm going to become a lawyer. And he becomes a lawyer, and then the son becomes a politician, right? So there's an easier entryway into that field of politics and political influence than if somebody came from a working class or a lower middle class existence where the parent was, a school teacher, and the kid wanted to go to Harvard and become president. Well, chances are that's probably not going to happen. You gotta have things in play to help that, to help move you forward. Okay, so Gans, Herbert Gans, he's a pretty interesting guy. He says poverty is important. Poverty serves a function. We all don't want to clean our own toilets. I mean, let's face it, how many of you would love to stop this lecture and do the dishes, or clean the house, or do the laundry? I mean, besides not wanting to listen to me talk anymore. How many of you really want to do that? How many of you really want to have to unclog a sewage system? Nobody wants to do that, right? So we have these individuals who don't make a lot of money, right, theoretically, going out and doing these things. If I can afford to hire somebody to do my lawn, it means I don't have to do it. I get free time. I'm going to pay the kid next door $25 to mow my lawn. That means I have an hour of free time that I didn't have before, right? It also helps to create jobs for the poor. So, I have a homeless shelter not far from where I live. And if I went there and I said, hey, I have some work that I need to have done in my house. I need to, have the painters come in and do it. Well, it might be $600-700 to paint one room. I don't know. I would do it myself, to be honest with you. But let's just say it's like $800 for some cats to come in and paint my house. Well, that's 2 people, right? Well, I go down to my homeless shelter or, a place that helps the working poor, and I say, do you have 3 guys, 4 guys that can come over? I can pay them $100 each, to paint my house. Oh, yeah, sure, Susan, no problem. I'd save 50%, and these guys have money to take home to buy food for their kids. So poverty serves a positive function in society. It also, Gans says, allows us to use the poor as a scapegoat. Yes, we can say that it's the poor people that are bringing this country down. It's those people, those darn people at Walmart. Those workers at Walmart. They're willing to work for less than a living wage with no benefits, and it's because of them that the union can't get whatever it is, right? We tend to blame the poor for a lot of our problems, and it's easy to do because they have Usually the working poor have very little to no voice in our society. If we fought poverty, if each and every individual in this country that could fight poverty did, they fought to end poverty, it would mean that they would give up some of their resources, right? And if you don't have a poor working class group to compare yourself to, then what's the point? I can say I'm better off than this cat over here. That makes me feel good. So I have a stake in leaving this guy in the social position that he's in. So I believe with Herb. I believe in Herb. I like what he has to say about this. Marx, here he is, finally. Okay. So Marx says that the conflict that exists is between the workers who have to work to survive and the people, the capitalists, the business owners who own the means of production, right? There's always going to be that conflict. Because, Scrooge, right? That's an excellent example of this time of the year. You've got this guy making all this money, and he's just, he's saving it, and he's got everything he wants, and then you've got these poor kids that can't eat. Charles Dickens talked a lot about this, actually, in his literature. And there's a conflict. It's like, I would love to not go to work one day, and get a better, get a raise. But if I go on strike, I'm not going to get paid. And if I make my boss mad, I might get fired, right? So there's always this conflict that exists. But what happens, right, when the lower class, the working class, figures this out, that they're being exploited for their labor, right? As soon as enough of them figure this out, class consciousness happens. I look at you and you go, yeah, my boss is treating me like dude too, and I'm making minimum wage too, and my family's going hungry. Yeah, mine too. But we're going to rise up, right? The proletariat is going to rise up against the bourgeoisie, and they are going to have this class war, and things are going to change. And we go to the social and Marxist, socialist, communist model. But there is a vested interest to keep the class structure and the stratification in play. Because the less resources they have means the more resources we have. The closer we get, they're going to lose their power if we get too close. So we got to keep them separated. Okay? So you can go ahead, and I'm going to let you look through this on your own, this slide. Excuse me. This was talked about in the video, except with that last paragraph there, or the bullet point, which is really telling. And I think that Marx would be like, see guys, I told you, right, that the median household wealth of whites is 20 times that of a black household and 18 times that of Latino households. Okay? We look at those numbers, there's a lot that this is where race comes into it. What is it that makes these numbers even possible? That's wrong, right? That's wrong. That's saying that white Americans, right, overall, hold more wealth, 20 times more wealth than the black Americans, the African Americans in society, right? And 18 times the wealth of Latinos. So there's a huge racial disparity there. And that's where sociologists, we're going to bring in race component. We're going to use race to look at the inequality, right? Because that number, that last bullet point, tells me that there's some racial component of this puzzle that we need to figure out. Healthcare. We talked about this. This was earlier on, so I'm gonna skip over this. I'm sorry. And this slide was made before the Affordable Health Care Act. I hate the word Obamacare. I mean, just please don't ever put it in the paper or anything like that. But we talked about this earlier on. Okay, yeah, this is stuff that we've already talked about, so I'm going to skip over that if that's okay. If you want to take a look at the slide, go ahead, pause it, and then start it up again. When we look at inequality, we've talked about it really in terms of the United States, but there's global inequality too, right? Almost half of the people on this planet live on less than $2 a day. I mean, think about that for a minute. $2 a day. How are you going to live? Well, your cost of living is going to be like way, way less than what it is here in the United States, number one. But number two, you're barely surviving, right? And we tend to go into these countries as an industrialized nation. We go in and we exploit this labor. If we look at that exploitation, the proletariat and bourgeoisie, right? Put that in a global context. The bourgeoisie would be the businesses in the United States that go into underdeveloped countries and cheap labor, sweatshops, things like that. We like to compare things globally because everything is interconnected now. 200 years ago, there wouldn't be a Gini index, right? It would be like comparing apples to oranges. But the index that it's talking about here, the GMI, it's a comparative economic measure, and it uses a baseline of international dollars in a lot of the same way that we calculate our cost of living increase. It does that on a global scale. Okay, so they're going to transfer or translate everything into these universal dollars, and then they're going to compare what it would be to purchase a home in that country or in the United States. How much money would that take? If that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. And then one of the other symbols in variables in inequality that we look at on a global scale is the infant mortality rate. And it measures the number of deaths of infants under the age of 1 per 1,000 live births per year per country. And that's an important number because that tells us a lot about the living conditions in a country. And how the average person, what their life expectancy is, things like that. Okay, so you've got 3 different theoretical perspectives on global inequality. I don't want to talk about these because they shouldn't be on the test. And I don't want to confuse them with the theories that you've just gone over. If this was a full-length course, we would go over this much, much more in depth. But I want to kind of leave it at that. Okay, so there you go, my friends. That is it. You're done with Chapter 7. You guys are just, keep rocking it, man. You guys are doing great. Once again, please don't be worried about the end dates, due dates. It's all fluid, okay? My goal is to get everybody through the class as quickly but as painlessly, sorry about that, as possible. So you guys have a great night, and I'll be throwing up the next chapter here within the next couple of hours, I hope. Take care. Bye-bye.